said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abram said, "You've given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Now, to understand what's happening here, God says to Abraham, and I'm just going to call him Abraham because that's easy. God says to Abraham, "I'm going to be your reward." And Abraham says, "Wait a minute. If you're my reward, what can you give me? What is the reward? What can you give me?" Because see, in that time, if you die and you don't have an heir, then the stuff you have gets disseminated. It gets dispersed. It gets spread out. So whatever God gives him isn't really giving to Abraham, because Abraham doesn't have anything after he's dead. And at this point in time, he's already in his 80s. So God says, "I'm going to be your reward." And Abraham says, "Wait a minute. How are you going to do this? What are you going to give me?" Now, there's a really important principle here I want you to think about. He doesn't doubt that God will do it. He doubts how God will do it. And there's a difference. See, here's Abraham. And in chapter 12, God made this promise. In chapter 13, God made this promise. That was back when he was in his 70s. Now he's in his mid to late 80s. And God hasn't done any of this stuff yet. He's still wandering. He doesn't have any children. And so now he's in that dark place of saying, is God really going to do this? But he doesn't ask the question, is God going to do it? He asks the question, how God is going to do it. You and I get in that dark place all the time where we think God has made a promise to us. He says things in the Bible like, "I have predestined you to be conformed to the image of my son, Jesus. You are on a journey to become more like Jesus." Or he'll say other things like, "Everything works together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose." Or he'll say other things like, "I watch over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." Or, "I have never seen the righteous go hungry." God makes all kinds of promises, and yet we get into those dark places, those times when things aren't working exactly the way we thought they would work, and we begin to question, is God going to keep his promise? Abraham doesn't. He says, "I believe God's going to keep his promise. What I want to know is how. God, I know you're going to give me something because you said you were going to give me something, but what is it? Because I'm about to die, and my inheritance is going to go to this slave, Eliezer, who's not even from my hometown or from this area. He's from Damascus." Verse 4, "Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. This is very profound. Because see, that's not the way gods are supposed to work. Everybody who's ever heard any religious teaching knows this. I mean, gods work like this. This is the way gods are supposed to work. Gods are supreme, and they tell you what they want you to do. And then you do what they want you to do, or you're in trouble. That's the way gods are supposed to work. Gods tell you what they want you to do, and then if you do what they want you to do, you get whatever it is they want to give you. If you don't do what they want you to do, then you're in trouble. That's the way gods are supposed to work. Abram is having a very confusing experience, because the first thing God ever said to him was, "I'm going to bless you." The second thing God ever said to him was, "I'm going to give you all this land." The third thing God ever said to him was, "I'm your reward, and I'm going to give you a son." See, God doesn't work like all the other gods. The real and true God says, no. We start this relationship with me giving. And what does he want in return? Well, we're told there. What does Abram do in response? Verse 6, Abram believed the Lord, and God credited it to him as righteousness. That's enough. Here's the blanks you should write down. God wants our faith, and he gives us his grace. God gives us grace. That means we didn't earn it. Abram didn't do anything to get this promise. In fact, he asked a doubting question, and God replied to Abram's doubting question with, "Okay, I'm going to give you a son." And then Abram simply says, "All right, if you say it, I'm going to believe it." And see, we think of the word faith in the wrong directions too. We think that faith is one of these super religious terms. I have faith that God is going to move this mountain in my life. That's not what Abram's doing here. See, what he's doing is God says, I'm going to give you a son. And Abraham says, okay. That's faith. That's belief. That's him saying, all right. Just believing that God is actually going to do it. Not believing how he's going to do it, just believing that he's going to do it. And that's enough for God. God sees that, and the verse says, credits it to him as righteousness. How many of you have ever done anything wrong in your life? Okay? Everybody, right. Those of you who didn't raise your hands, shame on you. You should raise them now because you just lied. So, we've all done something wrong. The word righteousness is exactly the opposite. The word righteous means you've never done anything wrong. The word righteous means you've always done the right thing. You've always made the right choice. You've always thought the right thought. You've always said the right thing. Righteousness means always the right thing, always doing the right thing, always being the right person. Abram does one thing where he says to God, all right, and God says, that's good enough. I'm going to label you righteous. Totally and completely. This is astounding. Genesis 15:6 is such an important verse that you should memorize it, mark it down, highlight it in your Bible, because this verse sets the Old Testament premise that God is a God who works on the basis of grace, and all he wants is your response of faith. That's it. And that thing carries itself all the way through all the pages. So that when Paul writes the book of Galatians, he bases a lot of what he says on Genesis 15:6. God gives us grace and just wants our faith. But there's something weird that happens here. Because see, what happens after this is now Abram asks another question. It's kind of another doubting question. Verse 7, God also said to him, I'm the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to take possession of it. So here's the second promise. The first promise was the son. The second promise is the land. I'm going to give you this land. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? Now that question is a little bit of a doubt. That question is a little bit of a doubt. That's a doubt that God is going to do it. He says, how can I know? What will you do to confirm to me that you're going to give me this land? And God isn't fazed. Check out what God does next. Okay. So the Lord said to him, bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon. Abram brought all of these to him, cut them in two, and arranged the halves opposite each other. So you get the image of this. What he's doing is he takes a cow, and he chops the cow in half right across the middle. Okay? And he puts the head of the cow over here and the butt of the cow over here. Then he goes to the next level and he takes the goat and he cuts the goat in half, puts the head over here, the butt over here. Then he does the ram, head, rear. And then he does the birds. But it says here, check this out, it says, the birds, however, he did not cut in half. And then we get this weird line. It says, the birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. That's telling us that this isn't imaginary. This is real. There are real birds coming out of the sky to eat the dead animals. This isn't just some metaphor. This isn't just some vision. This is really happening. There are real animals cut in half on the ground, separated by this aisle. Okay? Sounds a little weird. Keep going. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then the Lord said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there, but I will punish the nation they serve as slaves. And afterward they will come out with great possessions. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation your descendants will come back here, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. A weird section here. God is about to do something with Abraham, but before he does it, he brings Abraham to a dark place and says, trouble is coming. There's going to be a hard time. But don't worry, I'm going to bring you, your descendants, through that hard time. See, even when God is making promises, He wants us to know that part of His promise includes the dark moments, includes those times that we have to walk through scary places. When you're going through one of those times, it's not that God has left you alone or that He's given up on you. That's just part of the journey. It's part of the road. Sometimes God had it mapped out long before. Keep going. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, a smoking firepot with a blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, "To your descendants I give this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaites, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and Jebusites." Okay, lots of people. But the smoking firepot and blazing torch appeared and passed between the pieces. We don't really know historically what this is all about. But what we know is that God is doing this symbol thing to make a covenant with Abraham. And we have a hint over what it means by looking at Jeremiah. I've printed it on your note sheet. Jeremiah 34:18 says this, "Those who violated my covenant and have not fulfilled the terms of the covenant they made before me, I will treat like the calf they cut in two and then walked between its pieces." God says, if you violate the covenant, I'm going to treat you like the calf that you cut in two and walked between the pieces. Okay, so based on that and based on our knowledge of some ancient history, this is what's happening here. Most likely, the best we can piece this together is that when two people were making a covenant with each other, they wouldn't sign their names on a piece of paper and then file it with the state. They wouldn't go through some ceremony like that. What they would do is they would take an animal and they would cut it in half and they would walk between the pieces. So here you go. You've got a cow's rear over there. You've got a cow's head over here. And you and I are making a decision for each other. And we're going to walk right through it. We're going to walk through it with the idea of this. If you break this covenant, may you become like this cow. If I break this covenant, may I become like this cow. Because see, cows are not supposed to be split. I mean, you split a cow in half, it's not the way they're supposed to work. That means if I'm making a covenant with this other person and we split, that's not the way it's supposed to work. You can think about this in terms of a business arrangement, a marriage, something like that. Maybe for our marriages, we should cut more animals in half and walk. PETA would have a nightmare with that. I mean, it would just... So you walk through this thing and you say to this other person, may you become like that cow if you ever break this. May I become like this cow if I ever break this. Yeah, there'd be less divorce, right? So here you go. You walk through the cow piece.